Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. It's been over 3 years since the first COVID-19 case was reported in Wuhan, China. And now scientists at the U.S. Energy Department say the outbreak likely stemmed from a lab leak within that city. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
Reversing a previously undecided stance, the Department of Energy now believes the COVID-19 pandemic most likely came from a laboratory leak in Wuhan, China. That's according to a new report by the Wall Street Journal, which cites a classified intelligence report reportedly provided to the White House and key members of Congress. The White House, however, would not confirm that report on Monday, adding that there still hadn't been a conclusion.
But I'm not going to confirm the press reporting that was out there. The work is still ongoing. There hasn't been a final conclusion arrived at here.
And regarding if the American public will learn more about what's being reviewed.
And we're just not there yet. And when we're there yet, and if we have something that is ready to be briefed to the American people and to Congress, then we're going to do that.
The White House adds that the U.S. has been consistently calling on the Chinese regime to be more transparent. That includes at a meeting between Biden and Xi a few months ago.
We have consistently made it clear that we want China's full cooperation in a full, transparent way with the investigations into COVID.
All this as some lawmakers are calling for greater transparency and accountability. Republican Senators Rand Paul and Josh Hawley are urging the Biden administration to declassify documents about COVID origins. And Senator Tom Cotton says what matters is holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable so this doesn't happen again. Meanwhile, Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton says,
look, I'm not entirely surprised. The Chinese have mishandled COVID at every step of the way, trying to sweep it under the rug.
And a U.S. ambassador to China calls on the Chinese regime.
Of course, be more honest about what happened 3 years ago in Wuhan with the origin of the COVID-19 crisis.
The White House says President Biden has devoted resources to investigating the origin of COVID, but it has also repeatedly noted the lack of cooperation from Beijing has made such investigations more difficult. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Senators on Capitol Hill are sounding the alarm that the WHO is compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. This as the global organization meets in Switzerland today to negotiate final terms of an accord to grant centralized authority over U.S. policy in the case of another pandemic. Senators are now pushing back. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more from Capitol Hill.
The World Health Organization met today to discuss an accord that would set the standard for how to handle future pandemics. Here's the United States' official comments from today's meeting.
The United States is committed to the Pandemic Accord to form a major component of the global health architecture for generations to come.
Now, these terms that the WHO's member states are negotiating includes both non-legally binding and legally binding elements. Some senators on Capitol Hill, as well as some think tank organizations, are sounding the alarm. For example, the Heritage Foundation warned, quote, "This draft would dramatically expand WHO authority to declare a pandemic." A group of senators have introduced a bill to push back against this. This bill would specify that the Senate must approve of this WHO treaty before it goes into effect. Earlier today, I spoke with one of the bill's sponsors, Senator Roger Marshall. Here's what he told me about why it's needed.
Dr. Tedros, unfortunately, has been bought and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. So anything coming out of the World Health Organization, I'm very concerned about. But we'll never usurp authority to the World Health Organization over the United States. I think that they're way outside of their lane. I definitely think we should go back and restrict all of our funding with the World Health Organization until it has a complete review. It probably needs to have a hearing here in Congress and take a really deep dive, because I do think that they're being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party right now.
And some legal experts are echoing this message, calling for the need for the U.S. to pull out of the WHO and restrict funding to it. Right now, the U.S. is the largest contributor to the WHO's roughly $6.7 billion budget, with over $1 billion dedicated to health emergencies. Now, another senator who is a sponsor of this Senate bill wouldn't directly answer my question as to whether or not he would support pulling the U.S. out of the WHO and restricting funding to it, but he did have this to say about the organization as a whole.
Given the role that WHO played in many ways of being complicit with the Chinese and covering up what happened in Wuhan, I think we're starting to, you're going to see a lot of new questions as the evidence continues to come out of Wuhan as to what really happened to the origins of the COVID.
The WHO will continue to discuss terms for this pandemic accord over the next month or so before they officially finalize the accord. But ultimately, it's unclear how much of a priority that pushing back against this will be for senators here on Capitol Hill. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has made an unannounced trip to Kyiv, Ukraine. Comes on the heels of President Joe Biden's trip there last week to mark the one-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. Yellen met with President Vladimir Zelensky to talk about ongoing U.S. economic support. She wrote in an opinion piece in the New York Times saying the U.S., quote, cannot allow Ukraine to lose the war for economic reasons when it has shown inability to succeed on the battlefield. Should politicians take a mental competency test? Some say it would be hard to measure the cognitive abilities that a politician needs to have in order to be president. Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley has proposed a mental competency test for politicians over the age of 75. This is part of her campaign in which she advocates for a younger generation to take power.
It's time for a new generation of leadership.
President Joe Biden will be 82 years old by the time the next president is sworn into office, and former President Trump would be 78. Haley's proposal would also affect the rest of Washington. Almost 10% of members of Congress are over 75 years old, including some of the top leaders in both parties. Former President Trump last week supported the idea of a test, saying anybody running for the office of president of the United States should agree to take a full and complete mental competency test. Senator Bernie Sanders, however, calling the idea absurd. Some experts now say age alone is not enough to determine who should take such a test. Also, the average age of members of Congress has been going up since the 1980s. In the current 118th Congress, the average age of senators is nearly 64 years old, and those of House members is 57 and a half. 16 senators and 36 congressmen are 75 or older. Disney World has just officially lost its self-governing status. This as Governor Ron DeSantis today signing a bill placing the district under state control. The bill was approved by the state Senate and House earlier this month. The new legislation means Disney no longer has certain governmental powers. Those powers include charging tax, avoiding state building and fire codes, and avoiding state regulatory reviews. Disney can also no longer operate its own utility and emergency services. The district will no longer be called the Reedy Creek Improvement District. It'll now be going by the name of Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. And Governor DeSantis plans to appoint 5 supervisors who will also need to be confirmed by the Florida Senate. Disney said it will not resist the new arrangement and will work with the state. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.